Hello Year 12, welcome to your next lesson. Today we're carrying on with gender, as explained by the cognitive approach, and we're going to do the evaluation today. So have your books ready, your notes and your pen. For your starter, I want you to answer these 5 questions. Number 1 is, what are the 2 gender schema theories that we looked at last lesson? What age did the first gender schema theory believe we start to learn about schema related to gender? And where does this knowledge come from, according to the theory? Then what are the 3 key terms from this theory? And then we're looking at the second gender schema theory, and I want you to answer, how does gender consistent and gender inconsistent information link to this one? So I want you to pause me, have a go. Hopefully you remember some of the answers. If not, go back to your notes or your textbook. Okay, question 1 was, what are the 2 gender schema theories? The first one that we looked at was Bem's GST, and that's all about how we cognitively process gender-related information. And then the second one was Martin and Halverson's, and they stated that schema, specifically gender schema, has a very important effect on what we remember, and then that affects how we develop that schema and consequently our behaviour. What age did Bem believe we start to learn about schema related to gender? 2 years old. And where does this knowledge come from, according to Bem? It's from their culture. So most cultures have very stereotypical views of gender. All cultures different. All cultures believe that men and women are expected to behave a certain way, but it's not consistent within cultures. So we learn it from basically how we grow up. What are the 3 key terms from Bem's gender schema theory? Number 1 that we looked at was being gender schematic, and that is when you believe that you should act in a way according to your gender, and you take those beliefs to analyze other people's behavior as well. So you want everybody basically to act within the characteristics of their gender. And then we have gender aschematic, and these are people who don't really think about gender in terms of behaviour. They don't really see characteristics as male or female. And then we have androgyny, and that is when someone possesses female and male characteristics simultaneously. And Bem's questionnaire tested, the BSRI tested how masculine, how feminine people are, and they said that the best way to be psychologically healthy is to possess both female and male characteristics. How does gender consistent and gender inconsistent information link to the second GST? The second GST was Martin and Halverson's schema theory, and they found that gender consistent information was more likely to be stored in memory and recalled. So, for example, I gave you the example of the little girl who likes playing with dolls. So information about dolls is more likely to be stored, whereas information about football, she will forget quite easily. Then gender inconsistent information, this is when information may be distorted to fit gender schema. So if you hear a story about a doctor and a nurse, and the nurse is male and the doctor is female, you might then remember it differently because of your schema. And I asked you to have a go at this question at the end of last lesson. Explain how the cognitive approach accounts for gender behaviours. Use the concept of gender schema in your answer. So you need to give me quite a detailed explanation of what gender schema is, and then maybe a little example from one of the theories. So this is what I've written, and you can mark it accordingly. You need at least 3 detailed sentences to get the 3 marks. Gender schema are constructs that tell us how men and women are expected to behave, and these influence our personal gender identities and our behaviour. Bem's gender schema theory suggests we develop our gender schema at the age of 2 from our culture and its stereotypes. So that would get you 3 marks. You don't have to write exactly that. You might have written something differently. If you're wondering, then just let me know and I'm happy to tell you what you got. We're now moving on to the evaluation part of the lesson. So as with every other topic, we're going to look at 4 evaluation issues or points. And the first one that I want to think about is, why is gender schema theory useful? So in other words, what kind of behaviour can gender schema theory help to explain? I want you to pause me now and just have a little think about that. So it helps to explain the rigidity of gender-related beliefs. And I'm going to explain what that means in the next slide. Children and adults tend to ignore information that conflicts with their current gender schema, and we only pay attention and take in information that confirms our current beliefs about gender. So it's a classic confirmation bias, which we looked at when we looked at the cognitive approach the first time. We take in information that fits in with our current belief system and ignore information that doesn't. For example, if a girl saw a woman portrayed in a TV drama as a nurse, then she would likely remember that. But if in the same TV show a woman was portrayed as a surgeon, they might ignore that information because it doesn't fit in with her existing schema. So we take in information that's consistent with our schema, especially if it is related to our own gender. So it wouldn't have as big of an effect. So if you're a girl, on male characteristics and male behaviour, and the opposite for males. So a strength is that GST, gender schema theory, can account for how it is that children's attitudes and beliefs about gender are very fixed, and they are. If you talk to any child, they'll say things like, "Oh, no, I can't do that because that's for girls," or "I can't wear that because that's for boys." And the explanation of this is that, so when we look at explanation, we say, why is this a strength? So we always start with a point, which is a strength of gender schema theory is that blah, blah, blah. And this is our evidence. And for our explanation, we need to say, why is that a strength? What does that mean? And it means that gender schema theory has explanatory power. It explains a wide range of ways in which young children think about gender. So it's useful. It's a useful theory. However, what else could explain how we learn about gender other than cognitive factors? Because it can't just be our schema that makes us behave the way we do. How else have you learnt about your own gender behaviour? I need to pause me and have a think about that. You might have guessed that this is a weakness, because a weakness of gender schema theory is that it exaggerates the role of cognitive factors and it underplays the importance of other ways that we learn about our gender. So you might have said, for example, the media, because we do learn a lot about gender behaviour in the media. And the one that we're going to talk about here is social context, because GST completely underplays the importance of it. Ben did mention the importance of social context, because they suggested that we do learn things from our culture and our society that we grow up in and the stereotypes that they hold, but it's the least well developed aspect of their theory. They do tend to focus more on the schema aspect, and that's a negative because we do learn a lot from our social factors. They have a massive influence on how we develop our gender. So for example, our parents' behaviour really influences how we see gender. If you see your dad in a certain way, like maybe he has male characteristics, and so if you're also a male, then you believe that you need to act like that rather than act like your mum. And that's a really important part of developing our gender identity. But also rewards and punishments that they hand out to children. So for example, a girl who wears makeup for the first time, their mum might be like, "Oh, you look so pretty." You know, that's positive reinforcement that we learn in learning theory. Or your dad watching football and you watch it with him and you have a nice time, that's reinforcing that behaviour that you should be watching football if you're a male. So how would you write an explanation for this? Why is this a weakness? I want you to pause me and try and write your own explanation of this point. So it's a weakness because it fails to address how social and cognitive factors interact. We can't isolate social and cognitive factors because they work in conjunction with one another. And therefore it means that gender schema theory is an incomplete explanation because it doesn't fully explain how we develop gender identity. Our next evaluation, I want you to consider this question. Why may the GSTs be seen as narrow view of gender? Think about what Bem stated and think about what Martin and Halvorson said. Why is it still a narrow view of gender? Think about what society sees gender as today rather than back when those theories were created. Last lesson, we spoke about how in the past gender was seen as binary. So gender was seen as categories of male and female, and you either fit into one or the other. You couldn't be part of both. However, society nowadays believes that it's more of a spectrum. So it's not a binary construct. You can be at any point between male and female. And the GSTs, the gender schema theories that we've looked at, still assume that gender is binary. They still assume that you're either male or female. So Bem did add the concept of androgyny to say that you can be male and female at the same time, but this isn't a third gender. Being androgynous doesn't mean that you're not male or female. It just means that you have both male and female characteristics. And this is a narrow definition of non-binary, and it's not as flexible as it may appear because gender is non-binary, and this view that it is binary is very outdated, and it's not consistent with the views of current society, where we see gender as more complex and fluid and non-binary. And these are two examples of famous people who are gender fluid. But there's lots and lots of people who are gender fluid who don't identify as either as well. So we need to, it's a weakness because it assumes that gender is binary. Final evaluation point. What did Martin and Halvorsen find relating to children's memory? How they did it is they showed 5 to 6-year-olds images of boys and girls behaving in ways that were either consistent or inconsistent with gender stereotypes. So consistent would be girls playing with dolls and princesses and Barbies, and boys playing with cars and trucks. So that was the consistent condition. And in the inconsistent condition, they would show girls playing with cars, boys playing with dolls. And when they were tested 1 week later for their memory recall, the children recalled the gender consistent behaviour much more accurately than the gender inconsistent behaviour. When recalling the gender inconsistent images, the children tended to change the details to make their recall more consistent with their schema. So if they remembered the doll, then they would assume that it was a girl playing with the doll. If they saw a car, they would assume that it was a boy playing with a car. So I want you to pause me now and think, what would the point of this be, of this evidence? Is it a strength or is it a weakness? And how would you explain the strength or weakness? And then try and write an explanation as well. So why is it a strength or why is it a weakness? So as your point, you could put a strength is that there is research support to suggest that memory is distorted by a person's gender schema. And then you would write about Martin and Halvorsen and what they found. And then basically you can just kind of repeat your point. Therefore, it's a strength because it shows that memories are distorted to fit existing gender schema. It's supporting the cognitive approach to explaining gender because it actually does show that our cognitive and our mental processes have a very big impact on our gender identity. I want you, for homework, to have a go at writing this 9-mark question. So we've never done 9-mark questions before, but it's something that will come up in your exams, and it's actually your longest answer that you will ever be asked to give in an exam. So we're going to go through what the exam wants from you and how we can answer it, and then I want you to have a go at writing it yourself. So let's read it first. Leo and Maria are siblings. Leo loves pretending to be a superhero, running around the house, shouting and waving a sword, which he uses to attack his sister. Maria enjoys playing quietly with dolls, changing their outfits, talking to them, and helping them do household chores. She often has girlfriends around to join in. So the question is, discuss the view that gender is mainly the result of cognitive factors. In your answer, you should consider gender schema theory and reference to Leo and Maria. And it's a 9-mark question. So what you need is 3 marks explaining gender schema theory, 3 marks worth of referencing Leo and Maria, and 3 marks worth of evaluation. And you know that it's evaluation because the question asks you to discuss. If a question asks you to discuss, then it means that it wants you to outline, which means to explain, and it also wants you to evaluate because it's a discussion. This is the mark scheme. So for the top marks, you need to demonstrate your knowledge of psychology, and this is your AO1. So you need 3 AO1 marks, which means 3 marks worth of explaining gender schema theory. So you can talk about them, you can talk about Martin and Halverson. You don't have to write too much, but you have to describe how our schema affects our gender identity and the way that we behave. Our AO2 bit is the context. So it's applying our knowledge that we've stated in the AO1 to the scenario. So you need to specifically name Leo and Maria. If you don't make it specific, then you don't get any AO2 marks. And then for the AO3, you're using an evaluation. So you can either write 2 peels or 1 peel in a lot of detail, and that should probably get you the 3 marks. So 3 marks for AO1, 3 marks for AO2, 3 marks for AO3. So I want you to have a go at this before posting your notes onto Teams. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know, and I will speak to you soon.